Imagine being just 12 years old and being praised as a hero by one of history's darkest figures. This is exactly what happened to Alfred Czech. His story reveals a terrifying chapter in the history of children in war. What did Alfred do to earn the Iron Cross Award during World War II? And what happened to him after the war? Join us as we unravel what happened to the boy whom Hitler awarded the Iron Cross Award. The story of child soldiers. Hitler came to Berlin for the last time on January 16, 1945, on his armored train, the Führer's special train. He had come from his last headquarters in the west, the Eagle's Nest near Ziegenberg, after planning the Ardennes and Nordwind defenses against the Americans. Both of these had failed, and Hitler now faced a new threat from the east that needed his immediate attention. It was clear that the Soviet Union was about to start a big winter attack, and on January 18, they did. In a month of hard fighting, the Red Army got within 100 kilometers of Berlin, but then stopped. Stalin wanted to take over Austria and get rid of the last German forces on his side in Prussia and Pomerania. This pause gave the Germans a short break to make Berlin's defenses better and get more soldiers to the Eastern Front. Even though the Soviets were still far from Berlin, the city was already destroyed by years of big British and American air attacks. There were so many attacks that Hitler stopped sleeping in the damaged Reich Chancellery and started sleeping in the bunker under the garden. He would work in the Chancellery during the day until March 1945, when he started living in the bunker almost all the time. The Hitler Youth, led by Arthur Axmann, was supposed to help defend Germany. Boys as young as 12 were fighting the Red Army all along the Eastern Front. Most of them were messengers, couriers, or supply workers. But when the Battle of Berlin started, many Hitler Youth groups fought alongside the remaining army units. There's a famous film of Hitler giving medals to young soldiers in the Reich Chancellery Garden. Many people say this is from the Battle of Berlin in April 1945. This is not true. The film was made on March 20th, 1945, and shown in remaining theaters soon after as part of a German military bulletin. It was the last film of Hitler that survived, and it was the last time the German people would see their leader before he died the next month. Another awards ceremony was held on April 20th, Hitler's last birthday, also at the Reich Chancellery. But this one wasn't filmed or photographed. The young soldiers in the film weren't from Berlin. They were chosen from other places because they had done well in battle and were picked for propaganda reasons to represent the Hitler Youth at a medal ceremony. At this time, the Soviets hadn't reached Berlin yet, so the city wasn't a battlefield. Hitler's appearance was carefully planned because he had gotten very sick and weak. This film, made 9 days earlier, was his last visit to the front. He visited General Theodor Busse's 9th Army headquarters at Schloss Freudenthal on the Oder River. You could see his left hand shaking uncontrollably. His mind was still sharp, but he couldn't make the loud speeches he used to. His last broadcast was on January 30th, 1945, marking 12 years since he took power in 1933. The German people never heard him speak again. But Hitler had someone to help him. His energetic and loyal propaganda minister, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, made the speeches needed to keep the war going. Goebbels, who was also the leader of Berlin, visited the front lines to show support for the troops waiting for the Soviets to attack Berlin. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, was famously filmed congratulating a very young soldier while visiting the recently recaptured town of Lauben. Lauben, now in Poland, was the site of a big tank battle and the last German victory of the war. The Silesian industrial area was important to the Germans, and Lauben was on the front line during a big Soviet attack that started on March 1st, 1945. German tank forces fought back and knocked out about 30 Soviet tanks. The German attack stopped on March 6th, but Lauben was one of many towns and villages the Germans took back during the short fight. The Red Army lost 162 tanks and 159 assault guns, but only 10 German tanks were destroyed. The German infantry had a lot of people hurt or killed, but the Soviets learned not to think the Germans couldn't fight back, even so late in the war. Wilhelm Hübner was a 16-year-old Hitler Youth who did well in the heavy fighting at Lauben. He was with his unit as a messenger for the Führer Grenadier Division. He went through a lot of Soviet fire to take messages from headquarters to the front lines. He also took a wheelbarrow full of Panzerfausts and food to the front lines, even though he was always under fire. Hübner was noticed for his bravery, and when Dr. Goebbels visited the town on March 9th, Hübner got the Iron Cross Second Class from the town's battle commandant. Then Goebbels congratulated him, and it was all filmed for propaganda. Hübner was told to fly to Berlin with 19 other Hitler youth from towns along the Oder River. When they got to Berlin, they had a big breakfast and got new, clean uniforms. Then they were driven to the Reich Chancellery. They lined up in the garden under Hitler's office window on March 20th. Hitler youth leader Arthur Axmann talked to them and told them to be calm and not to salute Hitler with the Nazi salute. Then Axmann gave each of them the Iron Cross Second Class, and some of them also got the Black Wound badge. Soon after, Hitler came with a lot of officers and helpers and walked slowly up to the boys. He went down the line, and Axmann introduced each boy. They talked a little, shook hands, and patted each other's cheeks. The remarkable journey of Alfred Czech. According to different sources, the youngest person to receive the Iron Cross Second Class of the Third Reich was a 12-year-old boy named Alfred Czech. He was a member of the Jungvolk, a group formed in 1936 for the children of Nazi Party members who were too young to join the official Nazi youth organizations. The last days of the Third Reich were extremely difficult. There was no place to hide, no way to escape, and everyone was unsure if they would survive. Despite this, some of the young boys showed incredible bravery, even though they knew that the war was lost. On March 20th, 1945, Alfred Czech and 19 other boys were chosen by their youth leader, Arthur Axmann, to meet with Adolf Hitler in the Chancellor's garden. Hitler personally congratulated them on receiving the Iron Cross Second Class. Alfred had earned the medal the day before when he helped 12 wounded German soldiers while under artillery and machine gun fire. He took them to a safe place and handed over a Soviet spy to the police. This event took place just before Hitler's birthday on April 20th, 1945, which many people mistakenly believe is the day Alfred received the Iron Cross. He was given a watch as a reward for catching a dangerous spy. The boy was thrilled when he saw that the suspicious man, who had been photographed in his hometown, was wearing his divisional badge on the wrong hand. He followed the man until a policeman caught him. Adolf Hitler visited the family farm of a Czech family and told the boy's parents to prepare him for a trip to Berlin. There, the boy would be awarded the Iron Cross Second Class by Hitler himself. The ceremony where Hitler gave Alfred the Iron Cross was full of meaning. It wasn't just about saying Alfred was brave, it was also a way to spread a message. Hitler's talk with Alfred, shown in pictures all over the country, was important for a few reasons. It showed how much the government counted on young people. It made a big deal out of someone giving up a lot for the country. And it was meant to make people feel better about a country that was about to lose the war. As Hitler walked among the boys, he approached Alfred and asked, "Are you the youngest?" Alfred Czech recalls that he was so excited that he could only say, "No, my Führer," when asked if he was scared when he saved the soldiers. After the ceremony, Alfred secretly wanted to go home, but he couldn't because his hometown was already taken by Soviet troops. So he had no choice but to follow orders and continue fighting in Freudenthal, in what is now the Czech Republic. Alfred said, "All the regular army soldiers had to salute me because of my Iron Cross." But many of the battle-weary and depressed regular army soldiers he encountered simply told him to go home. However, Hitler's youngest hero stayed, and when he returned to the front, he was wounded in the lung and captured by the Allies. He suffered from the effects of trauma for the rest of his life. Before he was captured, an officer advised him to get rid of his Iron Cross and uniform, which he did. The harsh reality of war. In Eastern Europe, the situation was very bad. Kids were stuck between the moving Soviet forces and the moving German army. Some kids were even used in fights against the Red Army. Germany's national militia, called the Volkssturm, had boys as young as 12. As the war dragged on, the situation for Japan became increasingly dire. By the late 1930s, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, Over 40% of Japanese men aged 20 or older were conscripted into military service. But by late 1943, all men over 20 were considered for military service, including kamikaze missions. By mid-1945, things were looking bleak for Japan, with the Allies invading Okinawa. In response, Japan formed the Volunteer Fighting Corps, composed of civilians aged 15 to 60, with about 2 million conscripted. In Poland, despite the Germans' early success, resistance continued throughout the war. Children as young as 12 were involved, with those aged 12 to 14 trained for support roles and those aged 15 to 17 participating in minor sabotage missions. Older members, aged 17 and above, joined the assault groups, undertaking major sabotage operations and fighting in the Warsaw Uprising. Julian Kulski was only 10 when the war reached Poland, but he didn't sit idly by. By 13, he was a trained member of the Polish resistance. During an undercover mission to the Warsaw Ghetto, he was captured by the Gestapo and tortured, but gave them no information. He was rescued before being sent to Auschwitz and went on to fight in the Warsaw Uprising, the desperate end of World War II. As World War II neared its end, the Third Reich started to rely more and more on its youngest members, kids who were just about to become teenagers. This was a desperate time for everyone. The last few months of the war saw a lot of kids being sent into battle, which was a really sad part of the war. This time was full of desperation and sadness, and it showed how much the war hurt these young soldiers, both physically and mentally. By 1945, things were really bad for Nazi Germany. The Allies were getting closer to the West, and the Soviet Union was moving in from the East. In a last-ditch effort to get more soldiers, the Reich turned to the Hitler Youth. Boys, some as young as 12, were made to join the Volkssturm, a national army that was supposed to protect the country at all costs. These kids were given basic weapons and only a little bit of training before they were sent to the front lines to fight against the Allies. They had different jobs, like using Panzerfausts to try to stop the Allied tanks, or staying in trenches to slow down the enemy. Some were snipers or messengers, which were less dangerous jobs, but still scary. The one thing they all had in common was that they weren't ready for how bad things would be. The fight for Berlin was a good example of how bad things got for these kids at the end of the war. As the city was being attacked, Hitler Youth members were some of the last people fighting, trying to protect the ruins of the capital. Their part in the battle showed how the Nazis didn't care about the kids' lives and how they were willing to do anything to keep fighting. Lots of these kids died before they got to live. The impact on these kid soldiers was really big. They were made to do things that no kid should ever have to do, and they saw really bad things, like death and destruction, and everything they were taught to believe in fell apart. For the ones who made it through, the end of the war didn't make things better. Instead, they had to think about the things they did and what they were taught to believe in. After the war, things were hard for these young soldiers. A lot of them had a tough time getting back into a society that wanted to forget about the bad things that happened during the war. They felt bad about what they did, and they had a hard time dealing with what they saw and did and trying to be normal again. Stories like Alfred Czech's show how hard it was for these kids to get back to normal life after the war. The sad things that happened when kids were made to fight in the last months of World War II show a really sad lesson. War doesn't just hurt people on the battlefield, it hurts everyone. The Nazis making kids fight shows how bad things can get when people care more about their ideas than about other people's lives. The war's end didn't mean instant relief for young fighters. Many, like Czech, ended up in prisoner of war camps, while others came back to homes that were destroyed, finding it hard to fit into a peaceful world that felt strange and unwelcoming. The abilities they learned to stay alive weren't very helpful in a society that wanted to forget the war and start over. The change was tough, with many feeling left out, guilty about what they did, or just finding it hard to get back to regular life after such tough times. Getting back into society was slow and hard because of the physical and mental injuries from the war. For some, the years after the war were a time to think about what happened and sometimes feel bad about it. The ideas that made them fight were shown to be wrong, and they had to think about what they did and believed. The story of these kid soldiers shows how war changes things, not just for the people who fought, but for those who had to grow up too fast because of it. A life defined by war and resilience. After the war, Alfred bought a second-hand iron cross at a sale, and it has been hanging in his living room ever since. He managed to survive in the harsh conditions of a prison camp on the territory of then Czechoslovakia. Only in 1947 was he released and allowed to return home. A poorly fed 14-year-old boy walked from Prague to his parents' farmhouse in Goldenau, which by that time had become part of Poland. When he returned home, he found that his father was missing. In a fanatical, desperate attempt to contain the advance of the Red Army, the Nazi leadership threw into battle not only guys like Alfred Czech, but also hardened veterans of the First World War to form the last line of resistance. Among them was Alfred's disabled father. In the last days of the war, he was forced to join Martin Bormann's team, and yet Alfred felt that he had no other choice but to stay in the Polish communist country. He became a miner, got married, and sent countless applications to the authorities asking them to allow him to emigrate to West Germany. After being refused 13 times, he was finally allowed to move to West Germany in 1961. He worked there as a carpenter. After retiring in 1982, he and his wife Gertrude, whom he married in 1951, had 10 children and 20 grandchildren. He gave an interview to the Stern newspaper in 2006 and admitted that a photo of the Iron Cross, documents signed by Adolf Hitler, still hangs in his living room. Alfred Czech died at the age of 78 on July 13, 2011, and is buried with his wife Gertrude, who died at the age of 74 on January 18, 2007, at the local small cemetery. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Once upon a time, in a small village located in the heart of Germany, there lived a boy named Klaus. Klaus was an adventurous and curious child, always eager to explore the world around him. But as the clouds of war began to gather over Europe, Klaus's world was turned upside down. Like many young boys of his age, Klaus was conscripted into the Hitler Youth and underwent rigorous training to become a soldier. He was taught to march, to shoot, and to obey orders without question. Klaus excelled in his training, and his superiors took notice. One day, he was awarded the Iron Cross for his bravery and dedication to the cause. But Klaus's heart was not in the war. He had seen the devastation it wrought, the lives it destroyed. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the children who had lost their homes and their families. He had seen the pain and suffering of those who had been caught in the crossfire. Klaus knew that he could not continue to fight for a cause he did not believe in. So, one night, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. He deserted the army, leaving behind his uniform and his medals, and set out to find a new life for himself. For years, Klaus wandered the countryside, taking odd jobs and trying to forget the horrors of war. But the memories haunted him, and he knew that he could never truly escape them. He tried to find solace in nature, in the beauty of the world around him, but it was not enough. In the end, Klaus returned to his village, a broken man. He lived out the rest of his days in quiet solitude, tending to his garden and watching the world pass him by. The Iron Cross hung around his neck, a constant reminder of the choices he had made, the lives he had touched, and the price of war. And until today, no one knows what happened to the boy whom Hitler awarded the Iron Cross. The journey of child soldiers after World War. The end of World War II didn't mean everything was back to normal for the kids who fought in it. Instead, it was just the start of a long and hard journey to get better and fit back into society for the kids who had to fight. For kids like Alfred Czech, the war ending didn't make things better. They still remembered the fighting, the friends they lost, and the things they had to do. The bad things they saw and did in the war made them have nightmares, flashbacks, and other mental health problems like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. These problems made it hard for them to get back to normal life after the war. Kids who have been through war or fighting don't have regular lives. They might get angry or stop talking. They might start acting like they're younger than they are, have trouble sleeping, not be able to do things they used to, or have problems with how they act, learn, or get along with others. The harm caused by trauma from war can never be fixed. Getting back into society was hard for these young soldiers. People didn't understand what they went through, and they were treated badly because of it. Lots of them couldn't find jobs or go to school, and some of them started using drugs or doing bad things. The scars from the war, both on the outside and on the inside, were always there, making it hard for them to move on. Even though they had a lot of problems, lots of kid soldiers were able to find a reason to keep going after the war. Some of them worked to make peace and bring people together, using what they went through to show how bad war is and why we should try to stop it from happening again. Others found comfort in art, music, or other things that let them express their feelings and what they went through. The stories of kid soldiers show how strong people can be, even when things are really bad. What they went through shows how war can hurt people and whole communities, and why we should help people who have been hurt by war. By listening to their stories and understanding what they went through, we can show how brave they were and try to make the world a better place for everyone. Lots of kid soldiers came back to places that were different because of the war. Their families had a hard time understanding what they went through and why they seemed older than they were. And because they were part of a group that lost the war, people didn't want to be around them or talk about what happened. This made them feel alone and like no one cared about what they went through. Some people tried to help the kid soldiers when they came back. They set up programs to help them with their feelings and to help them learn new things. These programs had things like job training, therapy, and groups where they could talk about what they went through. But not everyone got the same help, and for a lot of them, getting better was something they had to do on their own. Families and communities were really important in helping kid soldiers get back to normal life. The people around them had to find ways to help them feel better and get used to being at home again. Some places had programs that helped everyone understand what the kid soldiers went through and made sure they felt included. But not every place did this. A lesson in history and humanity. The impact of kid soldiers on education and remembering. After World War II, the stories of kid soldiers like Alfred Czech changed from just being about what happened to them to being important lessons for people in the future. This change shows how important it is to remember what happened to these kids and to make sure everyone knows about it, so we can learn from it and remember how much war hurts everyone, especially kids. Teaching kids about child soldiers is important for helping them understand World War II better. When history lessons include stories about kids in the war, it helps kids see that war is more than just fighting and making agreements. It shows them how war hurts people. By talking about kids like Alfred Czech, teachers can help kids care more about others and understand that war is bad. It also helps them see why peace and protecting people's rights are so important. Museums and places that remember World War II are important for keeping the stories of child soldiers alive. They show things like their stuff, pictures, and what they said. This helps people understand what war was like for them. These places don't just remember the kids who fought. They also help people today connect with what happened back then. They make sure the stories of child soldiers aren't forgotten, but are seen as important parts of history. Documentaries and media have shown the stories of child soldiers to more people. These stories are often not talked about in big war stories, but in documentaries, they get seen by more people, not just in schools or history books. Documentaries that talk about what these kids went through, how they struggled during and after the war, and how they tried to heal and make peace, help more people know about their lives. The stories of kids who were soldiers are still talked about today. People think about the right and wrong of using kids in wars. This has helped make rules that try to stop kids from being soldiers in wars happening now. We often hear about child soldiers like Alfred Czech, who were in the middle of the fighting during World War II. But there's another story about young people who didn't give in to the Nazis. This chapter looks at the stories of those kids who didn't want to be part of the Nazi army and found ways to resist, even if it was small. This gives us a different but still very important view of what children did during the war. During World War II, young people resisted the Nazis in different ways. Some didn't follow the rules or tried to make things harder for the Nazis. They might have spread messages against the Nazis or helped people who were being hurt by them. Others joined groups that were fighting against the Nazis, even though it was dangerous. In a time when the government wanted to control what kids learned, education became a place where people fought back. Secret schools and groups were formed to keep some freedom of thought and to fight against Nazi ideas. These secret groups weren't just about breaking the rules. They were important for keeping up the fight against the Nazis and for keeping people's spirits up. The White Rose was a group of students, like Sophie Scholl, who stood up to the Nazis. They handed out leaflets that said bad things about the Nazis and told people to fight back without using violence. The White Rose is famous, but there were lots of other groups and kids who fought against the Nazis in different ways. This shows how many young people wanted to stop the Nazis. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.